You are listening to The Growth Signal. My name is Alyssa Nolte,
And my name is Steve Whittington.
and we're going to get right into it. Steve, what is your hot take?
My hot take, which is not comfortable for a lot of marketing folks, is that marketing needs to start with math. You need to know the unit economics of what you're doing before you think about all the other magic and creative and all that kind of stuff. You need to understand the mathematical model of your business that you're serving, whether you're sales or marketing, first before you get into any of the other foundations of your go-to-market system.
Steve, I went to college and I got a marketing degree. And if I wanted to get a math degree, I would have gone into math. So tell me, I got into marketing to avoid math, to not do that, to be creative and be fun and be quirky and be, kind of unique and interesting. So you're telling me that all of that crying over my algebra tests was maybe something I should have actually been spending more time on rather than just doodling in my notebook.
Yes, 1000%. Because if if you can't prove what you're doing with a mathematical model, if it's not actually driving the goals of the business in a measurable methodology, you don't have a go to market. If you can't actually put it into a spreadsheet and see how it's going to be working, there's no point in doing it. And that's the big miss. It doesn't matter. Like your creative can be awesome, but if you're not actually getting the unit economics, it doesn't matter.
I think we need to, put this on a billboard and fly it behind an airplane and maybe put it on a blimp because there are a lot of people who go into marketing and with the exact same kind of mindset that I went into it of, I wanna do something that's, interesting and creative. I want to create things and have people look at them and, move them towards a certain outcome. After I left college, I actually got into sales instead of marketing. And so I had this marketing degree, but I had a sales role. So then I learned in the field about all of those sales. And what I loved about sales is there are specific metrics. You are either winning or losing, meeting your goals or not, making it happen or you're not. And then when I talked to my marketing counterparts, where I understand their creative vision, but I would have that exact question: how do we know this campaign is working, and how do we know that I'm gonna get more qualified leads out of it?
Right. And that's the miss. I think all marketers should be salespeople. Well, I would also argue that everybody in an organization is a salesperson, because revenue is the lifeblood of an organization. Sales is not a dirty word. Profit is not a dirty word. And you need to know how efficient all your efforts are. And then you can put effort behind what is more efficient and what's working more effectively. Now, the thing that marketers always push back against when it comes to measurement, and that's been the big things that have been happening in the SaaS space, is that, hey, we need to measure everything, we need to optimize everything, and we're chasing, top of funnel to get it into leads at the expense of actually brand. But if you can look at your different tactics and you can put them into an overall cost of growth, that can justify a brand spend. Everything can be justified if you have the unit economics to prove it. And I do know from working with our clients that, yeah, you stop with a brand spend, your acquisition ratios go down because it is correlated. But you have to have that stuff in place to really prove it. But the thing of it is that the fundamentals of a go-to-market, which, first and foremost is understanding your customer, who your ideal client profile is. Like, marketing is not magic. It's not creative. It's science. Same with sales. It's science. And science is based off of, you know, theory, numbers, hard facts, right? So that's the thing that's the miss here is you need to put that mathematical model in place for how you're going to market and really understand how many of these ICPs that we need to actually be in touch with, how many touches that it takes, how do we move the needle to have an efficient motion to get them into being a customer for acquisition, and then what we need to do for retention. And what I find, the people in the SaaS space, they've got this. They've figured out the bow tie, and they're really working it pretty hard, and that's great. But traditional B2Bs, so you take someone that manufactures something that has a dealer network, they haven't quite wrapped their minds around what this needs to be. And if they can put in simple scorecards to really see where their sales and marketing efforts are going and what it is that they have to drive, and knowing the numbers they have to drive, they'll be far, far more impactful than actually doing some sort of Hail Mary campaign that might be in an industry publication or digital ads or whatever by actually spending the time to get on top of their numbers, like really deep into their acquisition and retention numbers.
I love that you bring in not just the fact that this is about how do we get these customers in, because a lot of people that I talk to, especially who are out in the everyday, like in the trenches on this, they're focused on what is my customer acquisition cost? How much does it cost me to bring this person in? How much is it going to cost me to close them? And how much money am I going to make on the back end? And they're not really thinking about what is my cost of growth? And I like that you use the word growth specifically because growth can come from new top line. Absolutely. And that's typically
Mhm.
where we think of it in the basic standards, but growth can come from retention and expansion and keeping those customers in place. And growth can come from optimizing and being more efficient with our process and how we're serving those clients. And I also want to point out and love that you specify that everyone in the organization has a sales role. I always tell people you are either revenue responding or revenue generating or you are unemployed. Those are your only options. And if you don't understand how you drive revenue by how you respond to revenue, like if something comes in and you deliver on a product, if you're not doing a good job on that, that is going to change the calculation of your value to the organization, how you can grow. If you're not driving revenue and bringing in growth or renewals, that is going to change the calculation of how you can grow. And so when we set our mindset of it is not just about like I'm not sales, it's not my job to drive revenue. We have to say we're all here for a common goal, which is to make money if we're all being honest.
Right. I mean, that's what makes revenue. That's what make organizations exist. There has to be free cash flow, which investors can get an appropriate return, and which then also that growth can continue to pay for the expansion of the organization's costs. Inflation, all that kind of stuff, right? So it it is the most important thing that everybody understands their job. I love how you put it, is either to help acquire revenue or retain revenue, right? Like just um, everybody has to be a revenue support role. So the thing that I see though that's also when it comes to numbers is the almighty forecast. And I call most forecasts that I see with clients hope casts. They hope they're going to get there. And it's in they don't break down the reality of it. Like in with the other thing is with a lot of traditional B2Bs, so with software as a service, you have recurring revenue. Like every month you get the monthly recurring revenue, right? But with traditional B2Bs, you might have accounts that buy 2 or 3 times a year. So that is reoccurring revenue. It's going to reoccur. Okay. So you can plan out those sales cycles based on what it is with your various different things with your accounts. But if you start with doing your forecast with understanding what your book of business is, where it is by having your accounts appropriately tiered, and so you can forecast on a per account basis, and you have a good idea of what's going to happen. And you say, let's just pretend we have a company that's 5.5 million bucks and they want to grow to $6.5 million. Well, they can look at their book of business and say, geez, I'm going to get $5 million out of that book of business next year with reoccurring revenue. And then you could put account plans in and work your account management team can work that and make that happen. And so you have to have 20% growth on top of that. Well, then you then resource your cost of growth and you resource your cost of retention to make sure that you can do retention and expansion. And there's multiple ways that you can do that. You increase price, that actually increases how much you get out of that asset class. You sell them something new, or you just expand in additional product lines, right? Like there's just all those different opportunities that you can do. But folks don't really break it down as simply as that and do the work to sort of sort that out. So then you really do know what you need to do. Um, and that then becomes the first part of the numbers, the unit economics you need to be able to hit your goals. So your hopecast actually becomes a forecast, which then creates activity metrics for your sales and your marketing team.
The one part though that kind of frustrates me when I'm talking to sellers or sales leaders or business owners in general is I love okay, Hopecast. I'm gonna steal that because 100% everything is a Hopecast with these people sometimes. But a lot of times they'll say things like, "Oh, I just need to add, another $1 million in net recurring revenue for my business next year, and then we will be good. We'll be good to go, and we'll be on a path to growth." And then my natural next question is, "Cool. How are we doing that? How are you going to do
Right.
that?" And the answer is, "Well, we'll just get more customers who wanna, do a net recurring revenue." And I'm like, "That is not how that works. Like, you are stating a dream, you're stating a wish, you're
Right.
telling me what is on your wish list for Santa Claus. You're not telling me how you're actually going to achieve that. So if you and I are in wild agreement that this needs to be the way, right? That we don't necessarily just hope and dream for some outcome, but we have a real plan with metrics, with a way for us to measure whether or not we're being successful. One, why does this keep happening that people are more hope casting than forecasting? And two, what can we do about it?
Okay. So number one, the reason why it's happening is twofold. Certainly in the traditional B2B space, is there's a lack of education around this. A lot of folks fall into sales because they were product experts and they weren't trained in sales. They weren't trained how to do this. So there's just lack of awareness, lack of training. Two, a lot of companies don't have the data model in place to be able to figure out what those numbers are. So they have a real, like most CRMs fail, not because of whatever the platform happens to be. It's because it's not being, the culture hasn't changed to actually use a CRM the way it needs to be used. So to be able to actually put, a prediction in place, you've got like a three-legged stool. You have to know what your average transaction size is. You have to know what your close rate is, and you have to know what your deal velocity is. And I have walked into organizations where at the beginning of the fiscal year, they're like, okay, we want you to come in and tune up our sales and marketing plan and help us grow. And they show me their hope cast. And I'm like, within about 2 weeks, I'm like, well, you're not going to hit. And they're like, well, we hired you to help us hit that. I'm like, you're not going to hit it. You have no chance. Not going to happen. Let's do a real one and go there. And they're like, well, how can you say that? I'm like, well, listen, your growth that you need is X and you don't have a pipeline to help put those accounts in place, and your actual acquisition cycle, sales lead time is about 6 months. So how are you going to do that? It's not going to happen. It's mathematically impossible. And I can see that like within weeks. So, so what they have to do about it is, one, you have to educate people on this, to actually think about this, think about what it is that they need. Two, you have to get the data model in place so those people can have the information to be able to make the decisions that they need to make. And those are the two pieces that aren't in place. Yeah.
I think there's also a third layer, and you alluded to it, but I want to just like double point it out. Is it's not just about, educating, and like don't equivocate on, because you could have very said, yeah, we'll do everything we can. Hire me for the whole year and I will do my best to help you hit the number and we'll work together. But you told them the truth, right? So you didn't equivocate on their hope cast. You told them the truth. Two, helping them with the data model. But three, CRM sucks, not because CRM, the tool sucks, but because the people who are using it are not using it correctly, as you said. So there's a huge change management and cultural layer that has to go into this process.
Absolutely.
I consulted with a huge, huge company on their sales team. Like we're talking like 80,000 sellers around the world. And they use Salesforce CRM, which, as anyone who's familiar with it knows, it's incredibly customizable, almost to the point where maybe too customizable, and people do things they shouldn't be doing to make it impossible to use.
Yeah.
Um,
I've used Salesforce. I agree.
and like I was going through this process and we were mapping the sales process and what does it take for a seller to go from, okay, I have a qualified lead, to that lead is booked and they get to move on from it. And we discovered all of these parts of their process, particularly in the CRM, where they would have to fill out required field, right? And those make sense from a leadership perspective. I need this information so that I can forecast for my boss and my boss can forecast for the board or whatever. But what we discovered is that they were required at a point in the process at which they didn't actually have that information. They couldn't possibly have that information
Right.
yet at this point in the sales cycle. And so they were putting in dummy data to bypass the field so they could get to the fields they actually needed to fill out in order to keep moving this thing forward. And then, of course, they're not going back to fix it after the
Right.
fact. So
Right.
executives are getting fake data that they don't know is fake data, or if they do know, they don't care that it's fake data. And the entire process broke down simply because one executive wanted a report that was their very specific piece of data and put it somewhere in the process without thinking it through. And because there was no metrics of whether or not that data was real, valid, or useful, that data model was real. All of a sudden, they had this fake data that was just causing friction and frustration. And it gave them not only a hope cast, but like a fake cast.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you see that all the time. Once you get people excited about capturing data, they go overboard and they want everything,
Yeah.
and less is more. But what you discovered in that example is that you uncovered, like, fake data being put in to eliminate friction in the sales process. So they're doing a workaround to eliminate that friction. And that's what, as a revenue leader, you have to look at what your process is and obviously try to remove as much friction as possible, but at the same time, making sure you capture the basic metrics that you need to be able to have a reliable forecast. And it's a bit of a dance. Obviously, but it really comes down to um, not having unnecessary elements in the sales process. As soon as you're starting to add friction, you really have to ask yourself, is this worth the juice? And I often work at the first thing I do is try to eliminate as much friction as possible to continue to move people through the sales process as fast as possible.
Right, whether that means you're qualifying them to close or qualifying them to be an unqualified prospect, right?
That's
But
right.
moving them in or out of the
Yeah,
process as
100%.
quickly as possible, not
Yep.
wasting time.
Yep. 100%. Yep.
So you kind of started on this, but where do we start? Like if we are looking at if someone is hearing this and they're saying, "Oh my god, I have put in all this friction. I am hope casting. I have no real plan. I don't have any metrics in place, particularly for my marketing team." How can we start to reimagine our sales processes and our and I use that word broadly, lowercase sales of
Yep.
how do we bring customers in? How do we convince them we're the right choice? How do we convince them to stay? How do we get started on this holistic growth process?
Okay. I'm gonna go real basic and back up. So let's pretend that you don't have a lot of stuff in place, but what you do have, unless you're really, really bad, is you've got some sort of P&L, right? You got a financial system that a lot of organizations is that, that source of truth. So, start with a lot of folks haven't done it. Start with tiering your customers. Find out who your strategic accounts are, who your growth accounts are, and who your transactional accounts are. So get that figured out. That becomes your reoccurring book of business, which then you can then put against what your goal is. So once you've figured that out and you understand what your tiered accounts are, you know what your average account size is, you will know the gap that you have to get your goal and how many accounts you have to acquire. So that's the first thing, is just get those top level goalposts in place. I'm going to hang on to this many accounts. I'm going to maybe grow them. And you can see what your churn is. Let's pretend you have a 5% churn and an average of 5% growth, natural expansion. Well, then you're level, you're stable, right? But maybe it's 5% and 15%. Well, then you're gonna guarantee growth, right? So you don't have to acquire as many accounts to hit your goal. So once you know those top level numbers, like that's the truth, and it's from your financial system, then you can start to say, okay, now how do I go about my account management process, and what does that look like? So I can map that out and figure out how to actually make sure you're going to get the expansion and get those numbers. And then what is your acquisition? And you now know, based on your strategic accounts and your growth accounts, who your ICP is. And you now know, looking into those people, even if you don't have a CRM, you'd be talking to the revenue leaders and they're like, well, I always talk to the salesperson. I talk to this, I talk to that. You'll get to know who the personas are, who the influences are, what that buyer's committee is. But it really, like, start with your internal data. If you're an established organization, really, really understand who your best customers are, and then start to build out from there and take that customer intelligence. Now, if I was like really starting from scratch, which often is the case, the next thing I do is like, let's have conversations with the customers. Ask them, you know, what is it? How, when they started with us, how was that process? What would they have liked to seen? Right? Get the customers involved in designing that process. Be very buyer centric, and you do that, then you can actually start to put a process in place. And then while you put the process in place, figure out how you're going to measure it and look at it weekly and adjust and learn. And that is from EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. Have your weekly scorecard in place for your sales division. And if you have issues, you talk about it. If you miss, it's red. If it's at risk, it's yellow. If it's green, it's green. Just work through it as a team.
I think it's really important too, because I run on EOS as well, and I actually have a lot of people who come on the show who do. It must be a fairly they must be getting a nice little, level of adoption and saturation in their model.
Hmm.
But one of the things I've seen on companies who run on EOS is they create metrics for the sake of metrics and not necessarily metrics that actually tell them the truth or give them a forward-looking viewpoint of what they're going to see. So, for example, if you're a salesperson and all you're doing is tracking the number of client calls that you have or the number of demos you do, well, yeah, sure, that's a metric, right? But if you're
Mhm.
not tracking how many of those actually turn into something or just turn into an endless loop of demos or phone calls and conversations. We have to figure out how do we make sure that these metrics are being tracked because they tell us something, not because we needed to put something on the scorecard.
Right. So, I mean, US to just go on that sort of talks, but again, less is more. Like the maximum, I think, is like 12 or 15 sort of thing that you should have when you're looking at things. I even break it down a little more simpler. Like I have three critical numbers, and I think most organizations will have a critical number. And what that is that a critical number is a number that if you achieve it, all other aspects of your business will occur as well. So for me, I know because of my close rate, because of my average transaction size, because of my average account size, because of my gross margin contribution, all that stuff, all those numbers I know. But my critical number is a number of discovery meetings, and because I know what my deal velocity is, all that kind of stuff. If I consistently hit X number of discovery meetings per month, true discovery meetings, I will then have my revenue goal and I will have my profit goal. Now, it's up to my team to make sure that my other critical number, which is CSAT, comes through, which is another canary in the coal mine for me, because that will then influence things. But ultimately, my whole team knows that, hey, if we hit this amount of discovery, we have this utilization rate and this CSAT, our company is good. And we all look at that and we all know that. And we're all sort of figuring out the other inputs into it to make those numbers occur. And so understanding your true critical numbers that drive the outcomes that you want with your business then helps you focus on what you need to do to achieve those critical numbers.
Yeah, it's almost like what metrics are the dominoes, right, that have to fall first in order for everything
Yeah.
else to go, and if those don't fall, nothing else will anyway. I think it's important too that we don't overwhelm ourselves, right? Just because
Mhm.
you can track it doesn't mean you should. Just because you should track it doesn't even mean it's the most important number that you have to track. There's a real dichotomy between you can track everything, but should you?
Right. Yeah. 100%. And that's where people get overwhelmed or they track for tracking's sake and they don't actually understand the narrative that the numbers are giving them. You should be able to look at these numbers and quickly understand exactly how you're doing as an organization. And that can be either like, hey, I got to clean things up, or we're doing fine, or we're exceeding and we can add some more gas to this process. Uh, but that scan really quickly, like I go away for a couple weeks vacation, come back, look at the scorecard. I know exactly how we're doing. Like in seconds, it's right there, right? And that's the kind of clarity all leaders want, whether they're revenue leaders, marketing leaders, or overall business leaders.
If someone is really connecting with you, they wanna learn more, where can they find you online?
Yeah. So I'm very prolific on LinkedIn. You can find me there. I post daily. So just look at my name, Steve Whittington, find me on LinkedIn. Otherwise, go to weareroadmap.com. And I would suggest that if you're really interested in seeing how you stack up with how ready you are to go to market or your go to market readiness, participate in our research, go to market readiness index, which will benchmark you against your peers. And for an added bonus as an incentive, we are offering $5,000 in roadmap services for the folks that either need it the most or can make the biggest impact in their cohort. So go there, have some fun, look at it, and that's how you can connect with me.
One of the questions I always love to ask on this show, because I am a perennially curious person. Considering all the people that you know or aspire to know, who else should we be paying attention to? Who else should we be listening to besides you?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I get my sources of information from a wide variety, listening to all kinds of podcasts, doing various different readings, like from The Economist to, old broadsheets to Golden Mail, reading the business section, that sort of stuff. But right now, I really enjoy listening to Make It Happen with John Burroughs. He's just, he's just no nonsense, and I like what he's saying, and I am trying to apply it to the traditional world. And of course, there's not a lot of stuff that I don't like from Chris Walker. And again, pulling that, and he's not as prolific as he used to be, but pulling that stuff back, looking at revenue architecture and pointing it into the traditional B2B world. There's so much that can be learned for the rest of the B2B world from software as a service.
This has been such a fun conversation. I know that everyone who listens to this podcast is like so excited about everything you had to say. Make sure you go check out his website, check out his offer. You won't be disappointed. Thank you, Steve, for coming on the show today. I loved this conversation.
It was a ton of fun.